Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're digging into ancient Rome, a world that, let's face it, still really fascinates us.
It absolutely does.
And specifically, we're looking at a really controversial figure, Lucius Annaeus Seneca the Younger.
Seneca.
Now, you might have seen that recent fictional film, Seneca and the Creation of Earthquakes. It definitely caused a stir, painting him in a pretty, well, negative light.
Yeah, quite negative.
But what's the real story there? That's what we want to figure out today. We've got, a whole range of sources, ancient historians like Tacitus, Dion Cassius, Suetonius.
The big names.
Right, all the way up to modern scholars. And we're going to try and unpack the real Seneca.
Separate the fact from the, let's say, cinematic fantasy.
Exactly. The goal is to get a clearer picture of him, this pivotal figure in a really tumultuous time, and maybe see what lessons his life still holds for us today.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, let's unpack this. So the film makes some pretty bold claims about Seneca. Let's start with his death scene. It shows him trembling, almost like he's seeking applause for some big dramatic exit.
Yeah, it's quite theatrical in the film.
But knowing what we know about Stoicism, how does that square with the historical accounts? What do the sources actually say about his final moments?
Well, it's a really stark contrast, actually. Tacitus, who's our best source for this, describes something completely different.
Okay.
When Nero's death order arrived, this was in 65 AD, Seneca was apparently remarkably calm. He just asked for his writing tablets.
Tablets to write what?
To write some final words of consolation to his friends. And then, without any complaint, he opened his veins.
Wow.
Tacitus says the witnesses were just astonished by his unwavering resolve right to the end, is how it's put.
So not trembling and seeking applause.
Not at all. Yeah. It seems like the culmination of a lifetime of Stoic practice, meditating on death, accepting the inevitable. It's pretty powerful when you think about it against maybe our modern anxieties about facing the end.
Definitely. And the film also shows his wife, Paulina, dying right beside him. Is that accurate?
Well, partially. Paulina did try to die with him. Sources say it was out of genuine love and devotion.
So she wanted to?
Yes, but crucially, it was Nero's soldiers who stopped her, not Seneca. They bandaged her wounds, basically under orders, and she survived. And she carried those scars, Tacitus tells us, as sort of marks of her fidelity. It's a powerful detail the movie just leaves out.
Yeah, changes the dynamic completely. Okay, another thing, the film uses the term President Nero, which just feels odd, anachronistic.
It's definitely jarring, isn't it? Artistic license, clearly. And it maybe slightly downplays the very real danger Seneca was in under an actual ancient tyrant.
Right, president sounds almost mundane compared to Emperor Nero.
Exactly. Though, interestingly, some of the source analysis does pick up on the film's implied comparison that sometimes modern elected leaders can act in ways reminiscent of ancient despots. It's a controversial point, but the source notes it.
Okay, let's move to one of the biggest criticisms Seneca always faces, in the film and just generally. The hypocrisy charge. Preaching poverty while being incredibly wealthy.
Yes, the wealth issue. This comes up constantly.
How does Stoicism handle that? Because it often seems to value simplicity.
This is where we get into a core Stoic idea. Indifference.
Indifference, okay.
So for Stoics, things like wealth, status, health, they're considered indifferent. They aren't good or bad in themselves.
It's about how you use them.
Precisely. It's the use that matters. And our research shows Seneca was very conscious of this. He used his vast fortune, and it was vast, for things like freeing slaves, helping young people get educated, supporting exiles.
So using it virtuously, in theory.
Right. The sources suggest he saw wealth, when guided by reason, as a tool, something that could open the door to courage and virtue. So it's not inherently anti-Stoic to be wealthy, as long as you're using it properly. That nuance often gets lost.
That's a really important distinction. The film also kind of suggests Seneca was insincere. Like he's reciting these Stoic maxims, but is crumbling inside.
The duplicity charge.
Yeah. And I mean, advising Nero, you can imagine the pressure. Someone described it as walking on hot blades.
That sounds about right. But look at Seneca's own writings, especially the letters to Lucilius. They're full of self-examination, self-critique. He's constantly probing his own flaws.
So not hiding them.
Quite the opposite. This isn't duplicity. It reads like profound sincerity.
Yeah.
Stoics don't claim to be perfect sages. The whole point is the striving, the constant effort.
The struggle itself is part of the philosophy.
Exactly. That internal struggle isn't proof he was a fraud. It's kind of the essence of practicing Stoicism in a really difficult world. It makes him relatable, I think.
And what about the idea that he died for his image, for vanity?
Again, that clashes with Stoic principles. For a Stoic, fame, renown, it's ultimately empty unless it's based on actual virtue.
Like an echo, you said.
Yeah, an echo in a tomb. His last recorded words weren't, remember me. They were about comforting his friends, urging them to stay strong in their own principles.
And he had that quote about death.
Think of death. It equalizes everything. That's aimed at reducing vanity, not building it up. Honestly, if he was just after glory, he probably would have tried to negotiate to save his skin, not embrace death after, frankly, provoking Nero's ire.
Okay, this next one seems really out there. The film apparently shows Seneca staging a human sacrifice.
Pure invention, utter fabrication.
No basis in any source.
None whatsoever. Tacitus, Cassius, Suetonius, none of them mention anything remotely like this. And it flies in the face of Stoic doctrine.
How so?
Stoicism condemns cruelty. It promotes this core concept called oikiosis.
Oikiosis.
Yeah, it means recognizing the kinship, the connection between all rational beings. It emphasizes mutual help, good service, basically treating others as part of your extended family.
So the opposite of human sacrifice.
The absolute opposite. Accusing Seneca of that is, well, it's deeply unfair and historically baseless. It ignores the very foundation of his ethical framework.
Right. And finally, the film shows his followers abandoning him. Fair weather friends.
Also not accurate, according to the evidence. We see loyalty. Lucilius, the recipient of his famous letters, preserved them carefully to honor Seneca.
So the letters survived because of loyalty?
Exactly. And his freedman, Statius, was actually imprisoned for helping Seneca, even after his death. That's loyalty tested under pressure, not the kind of flimsy betrayal the movie shows.
It's interesting how the film tries to use philosophical ideas against him.
When his actual life and writings seem to confirm those very ideas, it's a strange inversion, really. The cinematic fantasy kind of undermines the historical truth it borrows from.
Okay, let's broaden the view a bit. We need to understand the world Seneca was living in, especially how Nero came to power. It starts in 54 AD. Nero's just a teenager, 17.
Right, very young.
And he becomes emperor with Seneca and Burrus, the Praetorian prefect, as his key advisors, his tutors.
Afranius Burrus. And for about the first 8 years, their combined influence did bring a period of, let's say, relative moderation to Rome.
The Stoic diarchy.
That's what it's sometimes called, yeah. A philosopher and a general, both with Stoic leanings, trying to guide this young emperor. It was a pretty remarkable and probably precarious setup.
What did they actually achieve together?
They pushed through some significant reforms, changes to the judicial system, tax reductions, and notably, a period of clemency, especially toward the senatorial class. Burrus provided the military backbone, the stability.
And Seneca the moral compass.
Kind of, yeah. The moral and intellectual guidance. Together, the sources suggest they managed to keep Nero's less desirable impulses in check, at least for a while, maintained a kind of balance.
But that balance was fragile, because those guiding hands didn't last. Things started to shift dramatically when key figures were removed. Let's start with Nero's mother, Agrippina the Younger. She sounds like a force of nature.
Oh, absolutely. Incredibly powerful, incredibly ambitious, daughter of Germanicus, sister of Caligula, top-tier Julio-Claudian lineage.
And she married her uncle, Emperor Claudius.
She did, in 49 AD. A very strategic move. It allowed her to get her son, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who we know as Nero, adopted by Claudius.
Sidelining Claudius's own son, Britannicus.
Exactly, paving Nero's path to the throne. And under Claudius, she wasn't just behind the scenes. She shared power, quite openly. Coins were minted with both their faces. She presided over official audiences.
She basically put Nero in power.
She was instrumental. But here's the interesting part the sources hint at. She seems to have misjudged him, thought he'd be easy to control.
A fatal miscalculation.
It turned out that way. Her belief in his malleability eventually curdled into intense hatred on Nero's part.
And she was everywhere, wasn't she? Attending Senate meetings behind a curtain, co-signing edicts.
Her influence was pervasive. But pretty quickly, by around 56 AD, the young Nero, definitely encouraged by Seneca and Burrus, started pushing back against this maternal control.
How did he do that?
Started small distancing her from the palace, reducing her guard detail. Eventually, he essentially exiled her to a villa in Antium. Her power faded, and Nero's resentment just festered.
And it ended violently.
Extremely. He tried to kill her in a staged shipwreck. famously, but she swam ashore.
Unbelievable.
So then he just sent an assassin. Tacitus gives us that chilling account of her final moments, supposedly baring her abdomen and telling the assassin, ventre inferi, strike my belly.
Wow, her death in 59 AD, that must have been a major turning point for Nero.
A huge one. It's seen as the moment he broke his last real moral restraints, cast off tradition, any sense of dignity.
Okay, so Agrippina's gone. Then there's Burrus, the other half of that Stoic diarchy. He commanded the praetorians, helped keep Nero in line.
Exactly. Burrus was the military muscle, the steady hand. Appointed prefect largely thanks to Agrippina, actually. But he allied with Seneca to try and moderate Nero.
And his death, how did that happen?
It was in 62 AD, and the sources are a bit divided. Tacitus says it was a throat infection, maybe an ulcer.
Plausible.
But Dion Cassius suggests poison, subtly administered on Nero's orders, given Nero's track record by then, especially with his mother.
Poison seems quite likely.
It's highly probable Nero orchestrated it.
And who replaced Burrus?
This is where things really go downhill. He was replaced by Sophonius Tigellinus, who was notoriously corrupt and debauched. And at the same time, Poppaea Sabina's influence was rising. She became empress and seemed to just encourage Nero's worst impulses.
So the whole moral compass of the court just shattered.
Completely shifted. And the crucial result for Seneca was total isolation. He was left, as one source puts it, a philosopher without a sword, conscience without power.
And Seneca knew it, didn't he? He actually tried to retire in 62.
He did. He recognized his influence was gone. He asked Nero permission to withdraw from public life, even offered to give his enormous fortune back to the imperial treasury.
Give it all back.
Yeah, basically saying, take the wealth, just let me retire peacefully to my villas.
But Nero didn't just let him fade away.
No. Seneca was still too famous, too respected. His writings were circulating widely, his reputation was huge, and frankly, his massive wealth was a constant temptation for the treasury.
So even in retirement, he was a threat, or perceived as one.
Exactly. His very existence, his quiet, philosophical life dedicated to virtue, probably felt like a rebuke to Nero. And that distance, that withdrawal, likely just fueled Nero's paranoia and greed.
Which leads us right into the Pisonian conspiracy in 65 AD. This was the trigger for Seneca's end.
Yes, the immediate pretext. Senator Caius Calpurnius Piso organized a plot to assassinate Nero. It involved quite a few prominent people.
And how did Seneca get implicated?
The plot was discovered, betrayed by an enslaved man. During the interrogations that followed, Seneca's name came up exactly once. Just once. Mentioned by a single witness, a man named Natulus. He claimed there had been a meeting intended to warm the coldness between Piso and Seneca.
Warm the coldness. That sounds incredibly vague.
It is. There was no actual evidence presented that Seneca agreed to join the conspiracy or made any promises. Just this one flimsy connection reported by one person under duress.
So if the conspiracy link was so weak, what were Nero's real reasons for wanting Seneca dead?
Well, looking at the sources, you can pull out three main drivers, all intertwined. First, pure political paranoia.
He'd already killed his mother, other senators.
Exactly. He was terrified of anyone with charisma, anyone who could potentially rally opposition. Seneca, even in retirement, had immense moral authority.
Sick.
Financial greed. Simple as that. Nero's regime was incredibly expensive, constantly draining the treasury for his projects and pleasures. Seneca's tens of millions of sesterces were just too tempting.
Seize the assets.
Right. And third, and perhaps most importantly, Seneca's ongoing moral influence. His letters to Lucilius were already being copied and read. They talked about virtue, integrity, the dangers of unchecked power.
A direct challenge to Nero's rule, even if not intended that way.
Precisely. It was like a living conscience reminding Rome what good leadership should look like. As one analysis puts it, when the prince fears wisdom, he condemns virtue and absence flattery. Seneca embodied the wisdom Nero feared.
So the order goes out. What were Seneca's final hours like, according to the sources?
It happened fast. A tribune, Gavius Silvanus, surrounded Seneca's villa outside Rome. Seneca was questioned about the meeting with Natulus. He admitted it happened, but flatly denied any part in a conspiracy.
But it didn't matter.
No. The death order came anyway. As was the custom for senators condemned to death, he was expected to take his own life.
How did you do that?
He opened his veins. Apparently his blood flow was slow due to his age, so he also drank hemlock like Socrates and then was placed in a warm bath to try and speed up the process.
And Paulina tried again.
She did. She tried to open her veins too, but again, the soldiers intervened on Nero's orders, bandaged her up, and she lived.
And Seneca himself.
Tacitus reports that even as he was dying, He was dictating these long Stoic exhortations to his secretaries, urging his friends to remain firm. The witnesses were apparently just awestruck by his constancy of soul.
It's quite a picture, and modern scholars, they generally agree the conspiracy charge was thin.
Yes, people like James Romm, Emily Wilson scholars who studied this closely, they tend to see his involvement as minimal, if anything at all. The consensus is largely that Nero used the conspiracy as an excuse to silence a voice that troubled him, and importantly, to grab his fortune. And with Seneca gone in 65 AD, Rome really lost something vital within the halls of power. That living wisdom, as one source calls it. Other Stoics followed him soon after.
Philosophy itself became dangerous.
It became suspect, yes. Nero, having rejected truth and reason, was now surrounded only by silence or flattery. There was nothing left to check him. He became, as Seneca might have warned, enslaved to his own worst impulses.
It sounds like after Seneca's death, Nero just went completely off the rails, a pure monster.
That's how some sources portray it. The descent was rapid and extreme. You see this absolute artistic perversity and megalomania.
Like forcing senators to applaud his performances.
Yes. Competing in singing and lyre contests in Greece, demanding all the prizes, declaring his stage wins were equal to military triumphs. It was ruling through absurdity, through shame. You also have to picture these stern Roman senators trying to look enthusiastic.
It's darkly comic, but horrifying.
And then the boundless cruelties, kicking his pregnant wife Poppaea to death.
Horrifying.
Ordering the deaths of Britannicus, his aunt Domitia, his friend Lucan the poet, executing nobles on the flimsiest suspicion. There's that chilling quote attributed to him, wishing he could kill all Romans at once. He became, as one source says, inferior to beasts.
It's almost hard to believe one person could embody so much depravity.
And it continues, these sexual delusions. Castrating a young man named Sporus and then marrying him at a public ceremony, with Nero playing the bride. Organizing these vast public orgies.
And the Domus Aurea.
Ah, the Golden House. This incredibly extravagant palace built after the Great Fire. It had its own artificial lake, a colossal statue of himself, a revolving dining room ceiling that showered guests with flowers.
While Rome was struggling.
While Rome was under heavy taxes, facing shortages, it was pure indulgence on an epic scale.
And speaking of the fire.
The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. Nero's widely blamed, right?
Widely suspected, yes. The story goes he wanted to clear land to build his Domus Aurea, so he ordered the fire. And while the city burned, he supposedly stood on his palace roof and sang about the fall of Troy, accompanying himself on the lyre.
Whether true or not, it shows what people thought of him.
Exactly. And to shift the blame, he scapegoated the Christians, a small, misunderstood sect at the time.
Subjecting them to awful tortures.
Unspeakable things. Crucifixion, being burned alive as human torches for his garden parties, thrown to wild animals in the arena, all designed to deflect blame and provide a gruesome spectacle. It's just a relentless catalog of tyranny. How did it finally end for him? His downfall must have been dramatic.
It was swift when it came. By 68 AD, the armies had had enough. The legions in Gaul, Spain, Africa, they revolted. General Galba in Spain was hailed as emperor.
And the Senate.
The Senate, which had trembled before him for so long, finally found its courage and declared Nero a public enemy.
So he lost military and political support simultaneously.
Completely abandoned. He fled Rome in disguise at night with just a handful of freedmen left. He ended up hiding in a villa just outside the city, apparently paralyzed by fear.
Did he try to fight?
No, he just dithered. He kept lamenting his fate, couldn't bring himself to end his own life. He was trembling too much.
So he didn't even die by his own hand.
In the end, he needed his secretary, Epaphroditus, to help guide the dagger into his throat. A pathetic end.
And his supposed last words.
Qualis artifex purio. What an artist perishes with me. Even at the end, focused on his own perceived talents.
Wow. So when you put Seneca and Nero side by side, their ends. It's such a stark contrast, isn't it? What really stands out to you?
It's the ultimate Stoic lesson played out in reality, I think.
Yeah.
Seneca's death. It was self-possessed, calm, entirely consistent with his philosophy. He died, as we said, master of himself until his last breath.
In control.
Whereas Nero's death was just pitiful. Cowardly, terrified, needing help to do the deed, dying in the mud, imploring a dagger he dared not wield alone.
One mastered himself, the other was mastered by his passions.
Exactly. It shows that without reason, without that inner self-governance Stoicism teaches, a person can become worse than an animal, completely enslaved by fear and desire. True power, the story tells us, is ruling yourself, not others. Nero had absolute external power, but ended with nothing but fear, hatred, shame, and a miserable end.
What a journey. This whole deep dive, it really underscores how important it is to think critically about the information we get, especially from movies or entertainment, right?
Absolutely. It's not just about correcting a film's inaccuracies. It's about understanding why these historical figures and their philosophies, or lack thereof, still resonate and matter so much.
And it definitely highlights the enduring relevance of Stoicism, embodied by Seneca, especially when you see it contrasted with Nero's absolute tyranny.
Yeah, the philosopher's end was, in a way, noble despite the circumstance.
Yeah.
The tyrant's was just deservedly wretched.
So it leaves us with a thought, maybe. If power without that kind of moral restraint, that inner governance, inevitably leads to delusion, what contemporary figures, or maybe even institutions, could benefit from a really deep Stoic look at their own inner workings?
That's definitely something to mull over.
Something to consider until our next deep dive.